right, out today with the Airfusion EVO on the warmest day I've paddled this year for sure. It's about 22 degrees most of today. Completely amazing. It's going to be windy later. I'm in the Stockholm archipelago, the northern archipelago. Windy when I get out on more outer waters, or more correctly said, in the middle archipelago. But for the moment it's really calm, and that's I mean, it's wonderful to be out in weather like this, and we've really waited for it here because we've had a cold spring.
More on this later in the video, but it's worth mentioning the unique thing about this trip, which was that on the way back I actually took a ferry because I was so far out in the archipelago, and I knew that in advance. I had booked it, and I ended up being the only passenger, so I had the whole floor available for sorting out gear and whatnot. A bit of a special part of the trip, but I'll tell you more about that in a little while.
I mean, it's wonderful to be out in weather like this, and we've really waited for it here because we've had a cold spring. Now the flowers are out and animals are out. I passed a lot of horses on the way here, and you know, it's clearly spring and approaching summer, the early summer, and that's amazing. But on the other hand, it's not a great day to be out in a dry suit. You might note that I'm actually still in a dry suit, and that's of course because the water is still dangerously cold. So I'm using water to cool myself off, and that's kind of working so far. I'm not suffering too much, but overheating could be an issue for sure right now. And well, that being said, it's still cold water. I mean, it's really cold water, and that means you have to be careful. You always dress for immersion. If I were to end up in the water, on open water especially, even if I'm closer to land, I could be subject to cold water shock if I suddenly end up in the water, and that's not a good thing. Involuntary inhalation of water is a reflex that can occur at that time, and that means even if in a few seconds, that can be really dangerous if you're unlucky. And in all cases, I'm going to be paddling some open water passages, so I have to consider that I could end up in the water involuntarily. You always should be on the safe side of things, and as such, even in this temperature, it's still a dry suit season for me for a few more weeks. Right now I'm just guessing the water temperature out here could be maybe 7 to 8 degrees Celsius, which is dangerously cold. Even if it's warmed up a bit to 10 degrees, that's still dangerously cold. So even if it's 20, 22, 17, 18, whatever degrees in the air, that doesn't help me too much if I'm stuck out on the water and in the water, and have trouble somehow getting into my kayak for some reason. So yeah, cold water safety example. But it's definitely the warmest day that I've been out on the water so far this year. There have been a few days where you could be on land walking around in a t-shirt in temperatures much like today, and that has just been awesome after this really dull and cold winter and spring. But yeah, this is nice, and I'm exploring new areas today. that I haven't paddled before, and seeing them with this kind of light instead of the kind of gray skies that I become accustomed to during the winter and spring is a really nice feeling. So yeah, happy to be out here. I have a long ways to go, so I'm gonna pick up pace a bit and then we'll see how it goes.
Alright, so as you may have figured out, I was kind of mixing clips there between the actual voice recording I made at the start of the paddle and actual different locations I passed on the way. I've been kind of fast forwarding here because this was hours of paddling, and by now I've passed to the passage between Västra and Östra Lagnö. Östra Lagnö Island is on the left here, and as I pass under this bridge here, I'll be south of Östra Lagnö, and then I'll have open water first in front of me and then on my right side, and that's the first time I'll really not be sheltered from the wind, which was about 7 meters per second base wind on this trip. So a little bit of wind, and there was a risk that it would be increasing towards the end of the paddle, so I needed to be aware of that. Anyway, I might comment a bit on the actual nature of this paddling trip. I really improvised. I wanted to get out on seawater, and I actually wanted to check this area out, which I had never paddled before. I would be paddling just a few days later in an organized trip where I would be one of the kayak leaders or assisting other kayak leaders in leading a trip around these parts, but that would actually be further to the southeast, and on this trip I mainly ended up filling out areas that I wouldn't be getting a chance to paddle during that trip. So this way I get a whole sense of the area, which was pretty great. And getting here, I actually went by public transport. This means a number of bus connections, and basically the further east, the further out from main Stockholm, if you will, on this side that you get, the trickier it is with the bus connections. I mean, they certainly exist, but there's longer intervals between them, and I had some bad luck with one of the bus connections, and I would have, in my original plan, actually had to wait for a couple of hours before I could continue. So I improvised a bit, I thought on my feet, and changed my plans a bit, and this is how I ended up with this route. The whole choice of locations and such was actually something that I made on the day itself, and that's what I enjoy at the end of the day with inflatable kayaks or folding kayaks or portable kayaks like this, that you can actually take a backpack like I do here. This is footage from the bus heading back, which was actually also using another ferry to connect to get back to the mainland in the evening. But anyway, because you can bring your kayak with you and travel freely, that offers you a lot of options to actually adapt to circumstances and get back from locations you might not be able to otherwise, or change your plans or whatnot. And here I actually have a goal now to paddle more in the archipelago on the north side here, because usually it takes a little while to get out here. In Stockholm you have the seawater on the east side, and that is of course the Baltic Sea, and then you first have the inner archipelago with larger islands typically, which can go on for quite a while, and eventually you reach the mid archipelago, which is where I was paddling here, and outside of that is the outermost archipelago that, depending where you are, can be quite far out, with much trickier sea conditions as well, and that can sometimes take you a day just to paddle out there, depending on where you're starting from. So if you are actually living in Stockholm and you live on the east side, closer to these areas in the archipelago, then that obviously makes for fantastic paddle waters. But if you're living on the other side, on the west side, north or south, regardless, then it might take you longer, or it will take you longer to actually get out into the archipelago. Even with a car, it takes a while. And of course, if you're going by public transport, it takes maybe an hour extra. So this is always good to be out here, and I was really happy to be out here on this day and explore. And as you can see, it always looks less like waves and wind in the GoPro, but some areas were quite windy. And because I had to make the last ferry, I had to get back in time, or rather I had to get to the island of Husarö to catch the last ferry, which left at 6:50 p.m. If I didn't do that, if I didn't manage that, I would be stuck either here on the island or somewhere else. And the other option would be to paddle back to somewhere where I could catch a land transport connection, but that would require me to paddle far beyond sunset and mainly in the dark, and maybe as far as I had already paddled, which was more than 20 kilometers. So I was keeping pace and keeping an eye on my paddle plan and so on, and I did make it just in time for the ferry with a tiny bit of margin, which was enough. And this was a really nice opportunity to see this location and paddle these waters. Of course, if you are paddling on open water and solo kayaking, you always need to have the proper experience in the gear and know what you're getting into. If you don't, that could be a dangerous situation. So solo kayaking can be great, but done responsibly. Always better to paddle with others if you can, from a safety perspective, as long as they are also well prepared. And as noted, here I took that ferry to Östra, a large island off the coast, which in turn then continues across Husarö and then takes this ferry in order to get to the mainland. And by now it's basically starting to be around sunset. So if I had continued, it would have become quite dark in a while. But yeah, this was a great trip and a good test of the Airfusion EVO again. It did give me some trouble during setup this time, and I had an issue with the front thwart actually, which slowed me down a bit during the paddle. But it worked, and I had a fantastic day on the water. Logistics and hassle with carrying a portable kayak around like this? Sure, but it can create some amazing new combinations and experiences, which is what I really enjoy.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe in order to stay updated on new videos and help others find the information on this channel. Happy paddles!